Hello and welcome to today's webinar entitled Webinar Demand Creation, a Roadmap for Managing the Webinar Lifecycle. Today's webinar is sponsored by Citrix Online's GoToWebinar and brought to you today by the Content Marketing Institute. My name is Joe Polizzi and I will be your moderator today. All right, so throughout the presentation, we really encourage you to be interactive with the speakers and type in any questions and comments you have in the questions pane. We'll go ahead and be answering those questions live, both during the event and after the presentation. So what we want to do is have you join and follow the conversation on Twitter. We're going to be using hashtag CMI. That's hashtag CMI. And we'll go ahead and you could see the other handles, Twitter handles on the screen in front of you. I'm at JuntaJoe, and then we've got at Webinar Ready and at GoToWebinar, and you'll know exactly when to type those in when we get to that point. So just a little bit about me before we pass it on to our first speaker. I am at JuntaJoe, or Joe Polizzi. I'm the founder of the Content Marketing Institute. Basically, I travel all around North America, Europe, and wherever else I can go and evangelize around the idea of content marketing. And that is that we are all publishers today, and marketers are acting and thinking more like publishers, and that's why today's webinar is just so important. Also co-author of a couple books, Get Content, Get Customers, and our new book, Managing Content Marketing, which talks about all the organization of the marketing department around content today. A little bit about the Content Marketing Institute. Basically, we're trying to help marketers be, in fact, publishers and focusing on less renting of marketing and more owning of our own media channels. We do that three ways. First is through our events like Content Marketing World. Content Marketing World's next, it's basically the largest content marketing event in the world, and our event is September 4th through 6th, 2012 in Columbus, Ohio. We hope to see you there. We also have Chief Content Officer Magazine, which is a quarterly magazine all about content marketing, and then we also provide consulting services for the fine folks in front of you there today. Before we get started, we always like to just give a little bit of a preface for why we pick the webinars we do, like the one we are doing today, actually on webinars. And we have some research actually coming out very, very soon from the Content Marketing Institute and Marketing Profs on content marketing usage. And what's so important is that almost 50% of you in the audience right now are using webinars or webcasts as part of your overall marketing, content marketing tactics. And so it's really, really important that we understand the best practices, and that's what Mike's going to go through with us today. Especially when it comes to webinars, I love this stat, but when we look at effectiveness ratings, so basically we talk to people like yourself on this call today, and we ask them how effective are the different areas of content marketing, from blogs to webinars to in-person events. And actually webinars was the second highest rated technique out there, which means that webinars work, and they are working. And what we really want to talk about today is how they can work and work well for us. I just want to make sure before we go on any further, we're getting lots of questions about, are the slides going to be available and recording, and we'll talk about that at the end, but yes, they will, and you will get an email after the fact on that. So how's that for real time? So today you will leave here with why webinars are so important to your overall content marketing strategy, and then we're going to go through step by step with Caitlin and Mike about how to leverage webinars in the right way to grow your business, to attract and retain customers. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker of the day, but before I do that, Mike Agron is with WebAttract. So what does WebAttract do? So WebAttract is a B2B professional services, consulting, and training organization that delivers an end-to-end solution across the entire webinar lifecycle. Very relevant to today's conversation, and is very passionate, as you will find out, about helping marketing and sales professionals excel at webinar demand creation. So short bio on Mike, and then I'm going to have Mike take it away here. Mike Agron is co-founder and the executive webinar producer for WebAttract. Mike, I love your title. As a former high-tech sales and biz dev veteran with such companies as Apple, Oracle, and MapInfo, his focus is in producing what he calls high-performing, high-impact webinars. Amen to that. With predictable outcomes, and has done this for global brands such as Google, IBM, Oracle, Underwriters Laboratories, and many emerging B2B and SMB firms. And I'm very, very happy to hand off the reins here to Mike Agron today. And Mike, as I hand this off to you, it's just funny because we were just talking the other day. I think between the two of us, we've probably been on over 1,000 webinars or helped produce 1,000 webinars. So you are the perfect person to kind of take people step by step through the webinar demand creation process.
Well, thanks so much, Joe. I appreciate the introduction. And once again, to Citrix, thanks again for asking us back. We love this topic. We love the opportunity to share our passion for webinar demand generation. So let me just set the stage a little bit. You know, most of the people who have registered for this webinar are probably either a marketing or sales pro. And we know that you guys have a lot on your plate. And now webinars are being added as a tool for demand generation. As Joe just said, it's probably the second most effective tool out there for driving demand. And so whether it's a full-time focus or it's something that you have to manage with your other tasks, what I want to do is provide you with a framework of some best practices that will help produce the smooth pathway for results. And specifically, I'm going to go to the slide here and talk about what I'm going to be covering today. And really, again, with your work in webinars, whether you're responsible for lead gen or you want to reach beyond your existing customer base or you want to recruit an audience of fresh new sales leads or you're looking for a new take on how to produce and deliver webinars that will allow you to harvest more qualified sales leads, I'm going to be actually using examples and metrics from actual clients, and I'll be sharing dozens of best practices along the way that have created, as Joe said, what we call high-performance, high-impact webinars. And what that means is they meet or exceed the commercial outcomes of the webinar sponsor, and they meet or exceed the expectations of the audience. And they have predictable outcomes, because in business, surprises are something we don't want. We want to have predictability. And the way we do that is we'll walk through what we consider a repeatable methodology, talk about some of those best practices, and talk about how you can convert more prospects into customers. But to get that started, I'd love to launch a poll and just get a sense from the audience. I have two questions. First one is, how many webinar invitations do you receive a week? So Joe, could you go ahead and launch that, get that going?
Would love to. Yes, let's just make sure that we repeat that for everyone. So what we want to know, and we're going to have polls throughout today's presentation, so just be aware that we're going to be trying to make this as interactive as possible. So the question is, how many webinar invitations do you receive a week? We have three possible answers. The first one is none. The second one is I receive 1 to 3 email invites a week. And then the third one is I receive 4 to 5 or more email invites a week. As we know, webinars are becoming more and more popular. So why don't we go ahead and so make sure everybody gets time to vote on that. And why don't we go ahead and launch the results. And what do you think about that? Does that look in line with what you see out there, Mike, where the majority receive, one? I think it's funny, none. It's very, very small. There's a lot of webinars going on out there.
It's very interesting because the next poll is going to be kind of the tail of the tape, but we're seeing much more competition for eyeballs than ever before, and I'm saying in the last 6 months. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about is how do you cut through the noise and the clutter and be heard when these many invitations are coming a week. But go ahead, let's look at the second one and see how many people actually attend webinars.
Sounds good. So the second poll here, and we would love you to answer this one. How many webinars do you personally attend in a week? The first answer would be none. The second one is I rarely attend or no webinars a week. And then the third one would be I attend 1 or more webinars per week. That's none or rarely or no, and then attend 1 or more. So when we're ready, why don't we go ahead and launch the results of that poll. And it looks like, Mike, everybody's attending webinars. Let's see, okay, attend 1 or more, and then some, rarely. So you got half the people are attending 1 or more a week. But does this seem right to you? Do you see the majority of the people that you're interacting with that are attending webinars on a weekly basis?
Yeah, I think it's very encouraging that folks on this webinar are, half of them are attending 1 or more a week. Yeah, this seems to square with our experience. Absolutely.
Yeah, that sounds right. I mean, next week I'm going to actually be on 7. So it's it's more, to your point, it's just more and more in demand. But I'm going to love your take, and we've talked about it before. But how you really have to have that compelling content to make a webinar work, and I know you're going to get into that.
Absolutely. All right, so if we look at webinar demand generation, let's look at it at a very high level. If the end game is to get more qualified sales leads, as well as raise your brand awareness, what you need is a compelling value proposition, and of course that means content that matters, that connects, and you need to be able to promote your thought leadership, why and how you can help another organization solve a challenging business, technology, or operational challenge. That's what people want to hear today. And to that, if we look at the challenges that are faced, there's really four of them. How do we attract the right audience, get the right eyeballs and more of them to register and attend? How do we engage that audience so they'll want to hear what you have to say? And then most importantly, how do you get them to want to have a conversation with you after the webinar? Because the webinar is not about selling. It's about stimulating somebody's intellectual curiosity, giving them something, and inspiring them to want to have a conversation. Once you have a conversation, you can determine how you can help them and then convert them from a prospect into a customer. And so in doing that, there's more than just the technology. We love Citrix. It's the most stable, robust platform that we've used, but you got to go beyond that. You got to balance the business drivers. Why are you doing the webinar? What's your call to action? What are you looking for people to walk away with? And the logistics. You'll see in a moment a slide I have with moving gears. There are so many moving parts to a webinar. How do you keep the trains running on time? And of course, the human factors. You have a lot of different issues. You have some people who are webinar pros. You have people who have never presented before. You need to be able to bring the human factors out to make people connect with the audience. And then to that degree, how do you do it? So let's go through some best practices around a methodology and metrics to manage the webinar lifecycle. And if we look at it, we have 4 key phases. The first phase is in the upper left hand of the screen, which we call the planning and kickoff phase. This is where you get your team together. As you move through that, you move into what's known as registration and the analytics. You start measuring the results of how well you're tracking with your intended audience. And then as you get through that, you move into the third phase, which is, to me, one of the most enjoyable, which is the content development coaching, which is to take the written word and breathe life into it so it connects with an audience. And then when you're done, you go live, and what do you do after the webinar? And if you see these gears up here, that again identifies the moving parts. And as I go through some of the slides, I'm going to go through each phase, and in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see those gears, and the particular phase that it relates to will be highlighted. So if we look at this, the optimal results that we find are achieved from the time a client says, let's go live, is 8 weeks. And within that 8 weeks, we find that it gives you just enough time to be proactive and creative and not be overly reactive. And we find that whether you're going to do this, if you're going to do this yourself, you probably want to budget at least 1 hour of pre-production time for each live webinar minute. Now, a question we always get asked is, what are the best days of the week? We find that Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays are pretty much the best days of the week. At 10 a.m. start time Pacific or 1 p.m. Eastern or 11 a.m. Pacific is a really good time to do this. And we like to see, we recommend that webinars be done in 60 minutes or less. Now let's get into phase 1, which is very, very important. And again, at the upper right-hand part of the screen, you see my gears. So we love to have a virtual experience with clients and with presenters, but because it is virtual, there's nothing like a kickoff meeting to get the key people to socialize, become comfortable with one another, and to go through what are the objectives, what is the target audience, what is the call to action, what's the value proposition, what is the content we're showing, and how are we going to follow up. This can be done in about 45 minutes, but it helps to get everybody on the same page. And to that degree, we recommend that you identify your process. And what we do is we have a work plan for every client where we identify the key tasks, the due dates, the deliverables, who's responsible for what, and we stay on top of this because if something as simple as a headshot slips through the crack or a bio, it can hold up the overall flow of the production. Now, Moving from that, probably the most important thing to consider is your audience. They have to be your top priority.
Hey, Mike, can I ask you a question real quick before you go on to audience?
Absolutely.
We've got lots of questions coming in, so thank you for asking the questions. The first question that I think is really important, and we're seeing companies do this in less than 8 weeks. Like, tell us what's going to happen. What's the difference when you see clients that are going less than 8 weeks, or for that matter, over 8 weeks from a timing standpoint?
Great question. It can be done in less than 8 weeks. We've done them in 4 weeks. It just means that everybody's got to be on the same page and have everything ready to go. But the real challenge is this is a very iterative process and a creative process. And the more time you can spend on planning, the better your execution is when the curtain goes up. If you go too far over 8 weeks, it loses a sense of urgency. So the 8 weeks just seems to be an optimal number. And I have one of my producers in the studio shaking her head, yes. Sometimes, we can do it in 6 weeks, but I'm just saying 8 weeks is a good time.
Yeah, I mean, you could do it in 1 week. You could do it in a day, but it doesn't mean it's going to be as optimal as you want it to be. The second one question I think is really important, relevant to the days of the week you were just talking about, is Kathy's asking, what about global webinars? So, okay, let's say that half your audience is in North America, but the other half is global. How do you anticipate that? Is there a better time than not? What would you say about global webinars?
That's a great question, Kathy. We just did one a couple weeks ago for an audience in the UK. And as my slide says, making your audience your top priority, it was important to them that we started 9 a.m. UK time, which was 1 in the morning Pacific time. So we had a lot of pots of coffee going. But I would say that for doing an event where there's a global audience, on the registration side, we'll attract a lot of global players. And those that can't make the actual webinar, the on-demand recording, which is an excellent piece of reusable content, is something that they can ask for as an on-demand recording. If you do too early, then you get the folks on the West Coast. If you do it at 8 a.m. not East Coast time, but 8 a.m. West Coast time, you might not have a lot of the West Coast folks going there. I would recommend separating it into 2 different times, doing 2 different presentations.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Good. And then with your audience, learn all you can about them. You're never going to get to meet them live, so what do you know about them? And really what's most important is what you're going to tell them a must-have, or is it a nice-to-have? And what I mean by that is if it's not critical, and if they're getting 5 invitations a week, they're only going to register for the ones that matter. It's got to be something that helps them solve a problem that they're dissatisfied with or they're looking for a solution. Make sure that what you give them will give value to them attending, and as I said earlier, this is the opportunity to use your thought leadership to stimulate their intellectual curiosity so they'll want to learn more. We move into the tactical side. You always want to segment your prospects by industries, levels, departments, and roles. You want to make sure that you attract people that will find your value proposition of importance. And there's various sources to use. You can use an in-house list. You can rent it. You can use a media partner. We often partner with online pubs. We use their house list. We augment it with our own, or you can outsource. There's a lot of different things you need to take into consideration to get a list that's got the right quality. And then from that, what's often asked is, well, how do you size an audience? How do you know what you're going to get? These are some benchmarks that we use. And we have a database of over 100 webinars that we've done where we have probably 50 metrics. These are just a few of them. But if we typically want to shoot for 250 registrants and about 100 attendees. We know that we need a demographic matched audience of about 50,000. We know that about 1.5% of those are going to reach the landing page. And we know that about 1/3 of those will click through to actually register. And that's called the click-through ratio. And I'm going to get into that in just a bit and talk about the significance and importance of it. And that'll yield 250 registrants. We know from that 40 or more will actually attend. Now, one thing that's an interesting trend, Joe, is that while we are seeing a little bit more challenge in getting to some of these numbers, we're seeing that the people that do sign up, we have a higher attendance ratio. So where we are typically committing to a minimum of 40% attendance, our most recent webinars have had a close to 60% people attending, telling me that people are very, very interested in the topic at hand.
You know, one more point on that, I guess I was going to ask you. So let's say that to your number, let's say 40% attend the live webinar. over, let's say, a 6-month period, how many of the people that actually sign up will attend and watch the archived portion of it? It's significantly higher, correct?
Oh, it's much significantly higher. In fact, we've had it anywhere from 10% to over 100%. It's unbelievable. I call the on-demand viewing the gift that keeps giving, and I'm going to give an example of that in just a second. But
fantastic. Yeah, we've seen in our studies that it's right around 80%, so almost to a T, you get that full audience that is attending at some point.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because we'll get emails from people who registered. Gee, I'd really like to attend. I'm going to be out of town. Will there be a recording? You can tell they're very interested in the subject.
Very good.
So let's just take a real quick look at content. This is what we have found to be the best sources. People really want to hear about best practices and lessons learned and how you solve real-life challenges. So industry analysts are a great way to go. Authors, subject matter experts, particularly from a client or a partner who's actually done something, white papers, or actual client case studies. These are great sources of content. And when it comes to a client case study, this is about focusing on business value. This is not about a product demo or a sales pitch. Tell me about your company. What were your challenges? What were your options to solve those challenges? What was the solution or solutions that you implemented? Tell me the results, the metrics. How did you get to market faster? How did you cut down cost? What was the benefit? And what were the best practices? And tell me about some of the lessons you learned from doing this so I can see how that would fit my situation. And tell me finally, how do I get started? What are some things to do? So those are important from a case study standpoint. From a B2B theme, we find there's 3 areas that we've seen the most activity. Case study or business improvement. This was something we did a few weeks ago with HP and Intel, and it was about how they helped Parker Aerospace build a workstation-based virtual cluster, and Parker Aerospace gave the case study. The second one is a how-to or tutorial. These are very powerful, giving away a lot of information. This was a very interesting topic. This was from a premier, nationally known retail sales consultant, and his topic was culture shock. Shake up your company, your store, your people, and maybe sales increases will follow. Harry J. Friedman gave this, and he did an excellent job of giving the audience some ideas on how to get more sales for the Christmas season. And finally, we see a lot in standards and compliance. This was done by Underwriters Laboratory. And this was discussing standards impacting electric vehicle infrastructure equipment, about how to get to market faster and what you need to know. So these are some things to consider. Now let's move into the second phase where we're going to talk about the actual registration and analytics. And the first thing I want to bring up is on the invitation development. It's a very collaborative and iterative process. You asked me about why 8 weeks. Well, we go back and forth with our clients of coming up with just the right messaging. And this here, I'm going to give you some examples of them in my case study in just a moment. This is a company called Dex One. And if you're not familiar with them, they're a leading marketing services company, and they help local businesses reach, win, and retain customers with their print and online solutions. You may be familiar with them as RH Donnelly. They recently rebranded themselves. Anyway, what's important is that your invitations are clean, they align the message with the value proposition, and the with them is what's in it for me, what are people going to get. It's composed in the audience's jargon. If there's third parties, we leverage their credentials, we personalize with headshots, and again, invite, enthuse, excite, but don't sell. And in here, we talk about what you're going to learn on how to create your social media strategy to achieve results. This is targeted to small, medium businesses. And they're going to learn how to plan, how to listen to their customers, how to engage them, and how to monitor. That was very, very well received. Now, once they get the invitation, you want them to open that invitation and quickly go to your registration landing page. And the sole purpose of the landing page is to get them to register and to move on back to their normal day. We recommend that you ask minimally non-invasive questions, but what's important is this is where you can get some pre-webinar intelligence. What industry are they with, their company, their geography, and really, we always ask, what would you like to learn from this webinar? And the reason that's helpful is it tells us feedback. Are we connecting with what the audience wants to learn? Are they giving us any ideas that we ought to elaborate on? And how can we take this information and share it with our speakers to coach them to do an even more engaging presentation?
Hey Mike, what about spiffing them with like an iPad or something like that?
You know, that's a great question. I'm pretty much a purist. I want you to attend my webinar because you really want to hear what we have to say or what my client has to say. I don't want to induce you with a free iPad or anything like that. Come because you want to be here. That's what. And if we're talking about demand generation or qualified sales leads, let's get people who really want to be here. That's how I would approach it.
No, I completely agree with you, and I think the only other best practice that we've seen is to make sure that if you're going to spiff with something, do it with another piece of content, like an in-depth white paper or report based on the topic that the webinar's on.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Question we often get asked is, okay, so you're going for your audience. When do you start promoting the webinar? We recommend 2.5 to 3 weeks before you go live. And based on the feedback you get from your landing page and the metrics, you can adjust your strategy. If you're not quite connecting and you need to change something, you can do it. Also, we recommend interpolating between using HTML and plain text. We like HTML for the first couple of blasts because of your branding and thematics. But sometimes, because of all the emails going out, they can get caught in spam filters. Text gets through a lot easier. And always, you can spam compliant. And we always recommend that you do 4 well-timed e-broadcasts and use social media such as LinkedIn to join groups and to start a conversation about what you're doing.
Mike, real quick, because we're getting lots of questions really fast on the canned spam. Can you just detail what exactly canned spam means?
Well, what it means is that you are targeting an audience that would find your message to be relevant, to be significant to them. You're not harvesting leads. It's going to people that would find what you have to say of importance. Number 2, it allows them to unsubscribe. If they want to unsubscribe and they want to get off the bus, no problem, you let them unsubscribe. It just means following the policies so that you're not seen as spamming people, that you're only going after people who would find value in what it is you have to say.
Yeah, and best case scenario would be making sure that you are sending out promotions to people that are actually requesting that kind of information from you, like your newsletter subscribers or whatnot.
Exactly, exactly. And to that, let's take a look at the click-through ratio. This is the most important metric early on that will help you predict your outcomes. And here's why. On your registration report, and I will tell you that the first day of every campaign, we all sit around here and are on GoToWebinar looking for counts throughout the day, because what this tells you is 2 important factors. How many people have registered and how many people have clicked on the registration link. If you remember when I was reviewing metrics, I said we tried to get 50,000 people. We try to get 750 to come to the landing page. We try to get 1/3 of those. So that's a click-through ratio at 33%. If we're above that, we're doing really well. If we're below that, we're okay. But if we're too much below that, if we're in the low 20s or sub 20, we got a problem. So in this case here, this was early on in a campaign. We saw that we had 734 people register, 1,361 clicked on the link. That was a 54% rate. That was fabulous. And you'll see why in just a second, how that's a predictor for outcomes. We take that further and we manage the daily tracking of every touch point we do, what the touch point number is, what the period is, how many days, how many people clicked on the link, how many people registered, what was the click-through ratio, what we using, HTML or text. And you can see here we had an overall click-through ratio of 41%. We pretty well held standard. We knew we were onto something that the audience was very interested in. And with that, if we take it to the actual example, here's a national brand. And I talked to you a little bit about X1. But what's important here is that we registered 2,414 people. The total click-through ratio was 49%. The attendance ratio was 49%. We had 1,189 people. And in just, I guess, 2 or 3 months, we've had 248 on-demand recordings. This was very, very successful. But I also want to show you where an emerging brand is able to take advantage too. This was probably one of the most successful ones that I can attribute to. We did this just about a year ago on December 8th. And the company is novel, and they focus on the engineering community, and they provide a web-based application for integrating technical information that engineers can use to develop solutions. And the approach they've taken is a very how-to tutorial approach. We had 3 well-known authors here. You can't see the title real well, but it's called Designing and Verifying Safety Instrumented Systems. And it was all about the safety life cycle and how engineers are able to follow this to minimize their downtime and prevent costly safety incidents that can be expensive as well as fines. The value of this information was so helpful that we had 686 registered, 45% click-through ratio. Again, another great indicator. 51% attendance, but here's the on-demand recordings. In the last year, we've had 781 on-demand recordings, 113%, and about 670 of those are new sales leads. So this is, Joe, this is an example of how the click-through ratio can give you this insight and how it's the gift that keeps giving.
But you would say, and we've got a lot of questions around that, but you think that a good average is about 33%?
Yes,
okay.
Especially today.
Got
especially today. 33% is an excellent average. Okay, let's talk about some best practices on developing the content and the coaching. And when we go into looking at a webinar, there's all different types of notions. What is it? What isn't it? We think of it as a radio show with pictures. It's a mini event. It's got a little theatrics with it. And what that means is you want smooth pacing. You want it to go quick. You want it to be conversational. And you're a fabulous moderator, and you're going to make my point in the next slide. It's exactly, in my view, how webinars should work. It's natural. It's not scripted. And in doing that, one of the things that a lot of folks don't always take into account is the sound check. And poor audio is the Achilles heel for all webinars. And if you take a look at this slide here, what I'm saying is please don't use a speakerphone. Why? It presents a barrier between you and your audience. Cell phones, forget it. The battery will die, you'll lose the connection. And please don't use an open mic on your PC or your Mac. That'll create echoes. These are things that you might overlook, but they make all the difference between connecting with your audience or not. Speed is your friend. Get the fastest speed you can. That'll help you optimize your audio and video. There's free tests available from speedtest.com, from speakeasy.net. This is a test I did here at our studio. You just want the fastest speed you can get. Now I want to give you some ideas of how you could really connect with your audience. If you take a look here, there's 3 common devices. There's the landline, which is free. There's a consumer headset, which plugs into your either your telephone headset or your USB. And then there's a professional large microphone that's also a USB. And the difference between these is that the size of the diaphragm and the electronics is what allows you to create broadcast audio-like sound. In fact, Joe, I'm going to do a little experiment here. I'm going to turn my microphone down, and I'm going to pick up my handset. I want you to see if you can hear a difference.
Okay.
So give me a second.
Sounds good.
Hey, Joe, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
So hopefully you can hear this. There's somewhat of a difference between using a handset and using the actual professional microphone.
Yeah, you sound a little echoey.
Good. I'm back. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Then I talked earlier about, again, the human factors. When you're doing a webinar, you got to think like a broadcaster. You got to know how to work your microphone, the tone of your voice, inflections, smile, and monitor your breathing. Here's something that people may not always factor. There's always the Darth Vader effect. We'll go through a sound check, and there will be a presenter who's not used to doing this, will have a headset on, and you'll hear some hard breathing. It's very difficult to moderate during the webinar and get rid of it. So always want to make sure people have the boom adjusted so their breathing isn't picked up.
Mike, can you just comment again on what you're using right now? Because if people are asking, is it USB?
Yes.
What are you on?
Yeah, I am using an Audio-Technica 20 USB professional microphone, and I think they sell for about $130. It's really a good investment if you're going to do a lot of webinars. And then you can buy a scissor boom with it for about 50, 60 bucks.
Sounds good. Yeah.
And let's just move into the importance of table reads and dress rehearsals. Again, this is built into why 8 weeks provide optimum results. This is where, again, you want to bring your speakers together. We realize speakers have a day job, and it's always a challenge to respect their time. But now you want to use that webinar invitation to brainstorm the message shaping. You want to, most importantly, find your speaker's passion, bring out their best and engage the audience. Look, this is their 15 minutes of fame. They're excited to share a case study or how to do something. Give them the opportunity to do it. You want to practice flows and cues and transitions. And your slides should be visually appealing. The speaker should be the center of the webinar, not the slides. And develop polls and surveys to provide audience feedback. And I think Caitlin, who's going to be on after me, will talk a little bit about this. The other thing is the moderator is a coach. We use a producer for logistics. We use a producer for content to develop the webinar and also act as a coach. And a coach is someone who takes an ear, an objective ear, and helps people feel their best, brings their best up, keeps them relaxed, keeps their nerves down. I have to tell this real quick story about the movie The King's Speech. I went to see it last year purely for entertainment, and I couldn't help but walk away with an understanding and appreciation how Geoffrey Rush was able to be a fabulous coach to the king. He had good listening skills. He allowed the king to bring out his passion, to be natural, confident, engaging, and he had the courage to be honest and objective and supportive so the king could be successful. All right, the big day is here. We're going to go live. Do your sound check. I always recommend an hour before. And when you do your sound check, have a pre-flight checklist of everything you need to do. Do you have your recording ready to go? Just go through it. Even though you know it, it's too easy to overlook something. And have a plan B. If you're using GoToWebinar, use GoToMeeting Wizard. It optimizes your connection, then reboot. Turn off all non-essential apps and silence cell phones. Can't say how many times people have done that. You don't want pop-ups from your Outlook coming up. And check the service status on the global support page. Find out if all systems are working. Better to know if there's a problem, and if there is, I will tell you the secret weapon of Citrix is their global support team. That number there, 888-259-8414, has a knowledgeable group and an empathetic group of people who will help you if you're in a problem. And launch the splash screen 20 minutes prior to going live. That means make sure everything's ready to go. You can still stay in subconference, but make sure you're up and going so your audience sees that you're going to be getting started. And then finally, when you go live, it's really about having fun. It's starting on time, it's ending on time, it's respecting your audience, it's welcoming your audience just like you did. Don't sell, give them a call to action or next steps. But the most important thing, it's about connection and not perfection. If you're going to make a mistake or have an oops moment, that's fine. The audience will be forgiving. The more natural you are, the better. And then finally, after the webinar, now's the time to start and extend the dialogue to sell. Mine your final analytics, and that's take your registration, your performance, your attendee results, what you get on your polls and surveys, and start to develop analytics around insights for your prospects. Record and edit the recording for on-demand viewing. Send a thank you email and a link to that recording 24 to 48 hours from the webinar. And don't forget to thank your speakers. They put up with a lot to be on your webinar. And use these analytics to start a warm conversation with attendees and no-shows. And then you can begin to manage your funnel to convert and nurture prospects into customers. And so looking at this, we've covered quite a few things, but it really gets down to you can't plan enough. You can over-rehearse, but you can't plan enough. Plan your work your plan, have a methodology, have best practices that work, use metrics, and balance the business drivers, the logistics, the human factors, and the technology, and you'll be able to create webinars that are high performance, high impact, with predictable incomes. My hopes is that you will do this, and I would like to get some feedback and see from what we said how you're tracking with some of these things. Take the final poll, and then I have one more thing to say, and we'll turn it back to you.
All right, yeah, let's go through this last poll before we go on to Caitlin and then get the Q&A. So the question is, which of the following insights presented today will you use to manage your next webinar? So we have the role of planning, managing logistics, balancing the human factors, techniques for optimizing audio and video, and then using metrics to drive more predictable outcomes. So please go ahead and vote right now, and then let's go ahead and push those results out. So what do you think, Mike?
I like it. I like it.
It's kind of all of it. I guess it depends on where you're at in the webinar life cycle.
Right. Well, all of these are absolutely critical, and delighted to see the response. And really, Joe, I think the next slide up is just an opportunity to share with folks how they can continue the conversation and get in touch with us. So if you could bring that one up, I'll turn it back to you.
Good deal.
All right.
Perfect. Yeah. So real quick. Yeah. So just make sure before we go on to Caitlin, where's the best place that they can get a hold of you? And I know you're going to stick around for Q&A, but just so people know.
Right. Well, they can go on our website. We have a lot of best practice videos and case studies and on-demand webinars and samples. They can write to me directly at mike@webattract.com or call me at 916-804-4703. I'm on Twitter, and we also have a YouTube channel. And I really want to thank you, Joe, and Citrix for giving us this opportunity. It's been a ball. And well, I wouldn't tell you to quit your day job, Joe, but I could sure use you as a moderator.
well, I'll tell you. Well, first of all, thank you, Mike, for being on as well. You were fantastic. But stick around. Don't go anywhere because we got lots of questions, and we're going to get to as many as we can before the top of the hour. So stick around here. But let's go on to the next portion here, and I'm going to pass it off here to Caitlin De Diego here. And Caitlin is really passionate about giving people the tools to work and collaborate from anywhere. Of course, she works as the content development specialist at Citrix Online, and she really produces a lot of this compelling content that Mike was talking about today. Frequent speaker for Citrix Online's collaboration products, including GoToMeeting, GoToTraining, and GoToWebinar. And Caitlin, you have a background in journalism, fantastic, and online media, and you love to evaluate how people and companies use the internet to connect with people and share content. Well, you're definitely in the right place. So Caitlin, would you take the next few minutes and kind of go over these 7 steps, and then we'll get to kind of a joint Q&A.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Joe. And hello to everyone on the webinar today. I'm excited to be here talking to you about the webinar lifecycle and the things that you can do to make sure you're producing the best and most engaging webinars that you can. So before I get started, I just also wanted to give a big thank you to Mike Argon. Mike, you had some great insights for us today. And I loved what you said about recording webinars and spending time getting to know your audience and their needs. You made a great point about figuring out why the audience member choose to be in your webinar and providing them with the content that they need to walk away feeling like they received something of value from your presentation. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today. So I want to just jump right in. I'm going to start by asking a few questions. You can just type your answers into the chat box in the GoToWebinar panel on your screen. And my first question is, are you already producing webinars? Just type yes or no into the panel so I can get an idea of who I'm talking with today. Okay, great. You know, I'm actually not seeing the questions panel, so if somebody could just bring that up, that'd be great. Fantastic. Thank you so much. So it looks like we have kind of a good mix of people that are and aren't producing webinars yet. So of those people that are producing webinars, I'm wondering, how many webinars do you produce in a month? Let's see what we're seeing here. We have 3, 1, 1, 1. Okay, so the average looks, oh, we have some people with 12. It looks like the average would be right around 5, and that's great. No matter how many webinars you're producing, you want to make sure that you're producing the best ones possible. So today I'm going to share with you 7 tips for better webinar production. So let's jump right in. Okay, so our first tip here is a pre-webinar tip. And once you've decided on the topic and speakers for your webinar, scheduling, inviting, and promoting is next. Scheduling a webinar is really easy, and then you get to the important parts of inviting people and promoting your event. And reminder emails are a great way to help turn your registrants into attendees. So if you're using a solution like GoToWebinar, you'll want to use the reminder emails feature. You can customize your message and decide when the reminders go out. We think it's usually best to send reminders 1 week, 1 day, and 1 hour before the event. You should also be promoting your event through social media channels to get the conversation going before the actual webinar. So remember to use a custom hashtag on Twitter so people can easily find and participate in the conversation. As you saw earlier, our custom hashtag for this webinar today is the # followed by CMI. And this point relates to what Mike was saying about getting to know your audience. By promoting your event through social media, you can present the topic and ask for questions and suggestions of what to include on this topic from your registrants. So basically, you're giving your attendees the opportunity to influence the main points and scope of your presentation. So if multiple people write that they're confused about the same thing or that they're interested in learning more about a certain thing, you can incorporate that topic into your presentation. So posting a link to the registration page of the webinar or posting little tidbits of the information you're going to talk about in the webinar will help you get the conversation flowing through the social media sites on the topic and help you get to know your audience and their needs better. Okay, on to tip number 2. Prepare and practice. Now, this might seem obvious, but these are really critical steps for any webinar creator. So first, let's talk about practicing your webinar presentation. If you're using GoToWebinar, you can log into your account, select the event, and press Practice. It's right next to Start, and you'll enter the event in practice mode, but it will look and behave just like the real event. And this will allow you to go through the presentation completely and identify areas that need revision or elimination. So if you are using GoToWebinar or not, getting the speakers and moderators into a practice session can help work out any kinks that might otherwise come to light during the event. So this is a step that really shouldn't be skipped. And around the same time that you practice your presentation, you should be monitoring the conversation around your hashtag and social media posts. This is the time that attendees may have posted the questions or suggestions that will help you know where to focus during your presentation. So I can't emphasize enough how much your audience will value a presentation that caters to their needs. So with that, we come to tip number 3, and this point is really important because it will impact the amount of conversation you get on the webinar topic after the session. So is everyone ready for this really important point? If you are, then on your mark, get set. Remember to record. When you record your webinars, you extend the life of the presentation, and you can easily share the recordings to pass on to attendees after the session for their review. But you can also post to your social channels or website to initiate the conversation with new people and continue the conversation that was started before the event. People who have engaged in the conversation with you on the topic can be flagged as leads, so don't forget to use this really valuable feature. Okay, so tip number 4 is another in-session tip, and the basic idea behind tip number 4 is to keep your audience engaged. So you want to pay attention to the attentiveness of the audience. In GoToWebinar, that's easy to do by viewing how many people are listed as attentive in the dashboard. If at any time during your session you see the attentiveness levels dropping, it's a good idea to add an interaction into the presentation at that point. You could launch a poll or ask attendees to type their answers into the question, or type their answers to a question into the Q&A box. So asking your audience to do something will gain their attention again. And after that, being animated in your voice and using stories to demonstrate your points will help keep their attention. So tip number 5 is our first of 3 post-webinar tips for success. And it has to do with the survey at the end of the session. So when you get to the end of your presentation, launching a survey to your attendees allows you to get to know them better and find out if the webinar serves their needs. Maybe you want to know what content they're looking for, or you want them to evaluate the speaker they just listened to, or you just want to find out if they'd like to be contacted by your company. The surveys will help you find that out. The surveys are customizable, so you decide what your attendees are asked. Okay, moving on to tip number 6. We're now talking about analyzing your webinar data and using it to improve your next event. So GoToWebinar provides post-event analytics that give you valuable statistics, including your attendance rate, the number of poll responses, and an attendee interest rating to help you qualify leads. Reviewing this information is critical to creating a winning webinar strategy. For those of you who use Eloqua or Marketo or HubSpot, You'll be happy to know that GoToWebinar's integrations with these programs give you more detailed analytics on your event in an easy-to-read format. The integrations eliminate manual uploading, which can save you a lot of time, but no matter if you use these programs or not, analyzing your event data to help you plan for your next event is a critical step. Okay, finally, we have come to our last tip on better webinar production, and it is posting your recording webinar to your social channels or website, someplace where people can find it and comment on it. This is valuable for people that want to review the content or for people who haven't heard the content before. Posting recordings, like I said before, will continue or spark conversation on the topic, which will help you identify leads and share your information further. So everyone, that wraps up my presentation on better webinar production. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and I hope you gained some valuable takeaways to improve your webinar campaigns going forward. With that, I will turn it back to Joe. Thanks, everybody.
Caitlin, thanks so much. That's really, really good stuff. So, we've got about 8 minutes or so for questions. I know not a lot of time, but we have so many questions here itself. Let's go through some of these. There's one here on hashtags. Should we use a new hashtag, or should we generate something specific to the webinar? Mike, I don't know if you have a take on that, specific to hashtags for Twitter.
Well, a lot of our clients will do that. They'll create a hashtag for their particular event for Twitter, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We've had we've done it both ways for our webinars. We choose, like for this one, is hashtag CMI, which we think that is it's just consistent. We do the same one over and over again. It's consistent with what we do in the community, and so people can always follow the same hashtag. And that way, if somebody's following a hashtag, they'll always see when you have a webinar itself, and you can kind of focus on that channel and making that as strong as possible. I got another one here for you, Mike. They're talking about integration with social media. Do you really get signups from social media, or do most of the signups come from direct emails?
That's a question that we track when you attend one of our webinars or a client's webinar. How did you hear about this? And one of the responses to social media, we've seen as much as 20%, sometimes more than 20% sign up from social media. Sometimes it's less. I think it all depends upon the cultural awareness of the audience to social media and how interested they are in the topic. But it does draw in people, absolutely.
Very good. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's also, I think it's a reminder to attendees. Sometimes, yes, with what Kate was talking about with the reminders in email, we want to do that in social media as well. Kate, I have one for you here. It looks like somebody wants to know the difference between polls and Q&A.
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, polls are uploaded into the session before the event starts, and the answers are incorporated into the webinar analytics. The Q&A window is a place for discussion during the event. So webinar moderators can monitor the Q&A panel and either answer housekeeping and technical questions, and they can also pose topical questions to the speaker. So think of polls as the questions that you incorporate into your presentation as you're preparing, and the Q&A as a place to answer things that come up during the webinar. Having both gives you greater flexibility to get your audience's questions answered while also giving them collecting the information that you want to get from them.
It's really good. No, thank you. That's a great answer, Kate. Boy, the questions keep coming in, so keep bringing them. We're going to get to as many as we can on the questions. Mike, I think this is for you, and it looks like post-webinar. From a lead scoring standpoint, which are more valuable, folks who attended or folks who registered but were no-shows?
You know, that's a question that we get a lot, and we find both from a lead scoring standpoint are equal. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier. If somebody has opted in to register for your webinar, they want to attend. Just because the real world got in the way and they couldn't attend doesn't mean they're not interested. In fact, we often get emails, gee, I'm not going to make it. Will there be a recording? So calling first the attendees is a great way to spark a conversation, because you both have the webinar to relate to and to have a conversation about. But absolutely go after those who register as well as those who attend. They're both valuable from a lead scoring standpoint.
Very, very cool. I think this is a really interesting question, Mike. So the question is, why would anybody considering consider doing more than one webinar per month when it takes 8 weeks to plan and execute one?
Well,
Can you answer that question?
Can I answer it?
Yes.
Sure. Well, it's a great question. I think webinars, you have to scale the amount of webinars you do to the demand of your topic and the audience you're going after. We have a client, the Dex One. We have been on a roll with them for doing pretty much a monthly thought leadership series. Their audience can't get enough. The small medium business market is hungry for ways to survive, and so if you have something that's a must-have, topical, on the money, that's going to help them make more money, they will come. So it really goes to that. But I would say that you probably don't want to do more than one a quarter if you are not going to be giving new information. You don't want to keep going after the same audience. Give them a rest so you don't fatigue them.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, it's all in the execution too. So I think we have time for a couple more questions, and we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. So there's some people. There's a couple different questions coming in about the fact that they want to talk about their products and services. How do they get their product and service messages out? So maybe Mike, you can talk about the little bit of a difference between the 3 different types of more how-to educational webinars versus like a sales webinar. Maybe even from Citrix's standpoint, it's the difference between a GoToMeeting and a GoToWebinar. So, Mike, do you have a take on that?
Yeah, if I heard the question right, how do you get the more sales product demo type of webinars going? Was that the essence of the question?
Well, yeah, I think that we have some people here on the call that they want to get their sales. They want to get their sales stuff and their features and benefits out. But I guess if you're talking about getting people to a webinar, you can't be salesy. If you want like people to come to a webinar, I think that, I mean, you would agree with that. I think you talked about that in detail. Yeah.
It's real simple, if I may. From the time I carried a bag in sales, I found that if you want to have a opportunity to sell somebody something, you first had to get in a conversation. To get into a conversation, you had to take an interest in them, and for them to see what was in it for them to continue the conversation. A case study or a how-to is a great way to give an audience reasons why your product or service is something they want to explore. First step being a case study or a tutorial. Then you can go down into the product features. You've earned their attention after that point. But prior to that, who wants to be sold? You know, I mean, do you want to be sold? I want to learn something, and if I like it, then tell me more.
I mean, the best thing is the non-sales approach, and I mean, you hit that nail on the head. So, you know what, Mike and Kate, I cannot thank both of you enough for being on today. I think we've got to wrap it up because we're right up on time. So, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. We've got a lot of questions on who's going to be receiving what. So, everyone on the webinar today will be receiving an email that you'll get alerted to the on-demand status of today's event. And then you can review any material, and that will come with today's presentation handouts as well as the recorded audio presentation as well. So make sure you please, it's very important to us. We want to do better and better if we can on these webinars. So please fill out the survey when you exit the webinar, and then you get a chance for a free trial of GoToAssist with that. So and if you like that presentation, please let us know on how we can improve. On behalf of Mike Agron from WebAttract, Kate DeDiego from Citrix Online, and as well as the folks of Citrix Online for sponsoring this today, and then all the good people on my team at the Content Marketing Institute. My name is Joe Polizzi. Really, really have a good day. Once again, thank you again for joining us and taking time to review today's presentation.